Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having us here today. I'm very honored and pleased to be moderating this wonderful session on behalf of Invest Alberta. Invest Alberta is the Government of Alberta's provincial investment attraction organization. And in our day-to-day work, we speak with a lot of companies from the energy sector, and that's why this is truly a special honor for me today. To set the stage, I'd like to quickly introduce our very distinguished panel. We have today with us Ion Sterian. He is the Chief Executive Officer of...
Sterian.
He is the Chief Executive Officer of Transgaz, which is Romania's national gas transmission company. We also have David Cataford, who is the CEO of Champion Iron. Champion Iron explores and develops iron ore mines and also operates a mine just here in Quebec. We also have Andrew Gillis. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. We also have Andrew Gillis, who is the CEO of Aurora Hydrogen. Aurora Hydrogen develops and produces hydrogen and solid carbon without generating carbon dioxide. And we have Laurent Germain, who is the CEO of Egis, which is a global construction, engineering, and operating company. It is really interesting to have such a diverse set of panelists today. Because we're speaking about infrastructure and relating to clean energy solutions, maybe we can just quickly start off with just one or two lines for each of you as to what your understanding is about infrastructure as it relates to clean energy. Would you like to start, Ion? Just your definition of infrastructure for clean energy.
Încep eu, dacă dumneavoastră mi-ați dat întâietate. În primul rând să mă prezint. Mă numesc Ion Sterian și sunt directorul general al Transgaz România, care este operatorul național de transport din România, care practic are monopolul transportului gazelor în România. Într-adevăr, astăzi trăim într-o lume foarte complicată. Trăim vremuri ce populația globului nu mai le-a trăit de mult. Vorbim de poluare, vorbim de schimbări climaterice. Se întâmplă multe lucruri care nu ne convin, începând de la individ, mergând până la economie. Nu se întâmplă cum ne dorim. Poluarea e o poluare globală. Nu s-a ajuns la un consens nici până în ziua de astăzi între marile state ale lumii hiperindustrializate și care sunt cu emisii foarte mari de bioxid de carbon și influențează direct poluarea și schimbările climaterice. Și mă refer la China, India, statele din America de Sud, mă refer la Rusia. Mi-aș dori cât mai curând să fiu în acest acord. Cu toate că România, fiind stat membru al Uniunii Europene, în partea central-estică și balcani a Europei, unde încercăm să ne liniem la toate directivele europene privind reducerea poluării, schimbarea și a schimbărilor climaterice. Nici până în ziua de azi nu s-au venit cu soluții concrete, la un consens. Vorbim de hidrogen.
Sorry, if I might just quickly, I will come back to that because I think we were also going to circle back to some issues about jurisdictional impacts, but quickly maybe also to circle back to the other speakers as well. David, just for you, what is your understanding of infrastructure?
Oui, bonjour, merci beaucoup. Ça aurait été pratique hier d'avoir ça quand on a soupé ensemble, donc ça aurait été un petit peu plus facile de se comprendre. Mais je pense que quand on pense à infrastructure, pour moi, c'est très important de penser aussi à qu'est-ce qui est utilisé pour bâtir l'infrastructure. Donc, on pense à l'infrastructure pour décarboner la planète, mais si on regarde la cible de réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre pour atteindre une augmentation de 1,5 degré pour 2050, ça va nécessiter 3,5 milliards de tonnes d'acier supplémentaires pour pouvoir bâtir les infrastructures qui sont nécessaires pour décarboner la planète. Donc, si on regarde aujourd'hui la production d'acier puis l'impact, dans le fond, sur les émissions de gaz à effet de serre, on voit que pour 3,5 milliards de tonnes de fer supplémentaire ou d'acier supplémentaire, ça va générer environ 7 milliards de tonnes de GES supplémentaires. C'est l'équivalent d'à peu près 15 ans de ce que le Canada produit en termes de GES. Donc, c'est important non seulement de regarder comment produire de l'énergie plus verte, mais aussi s'assurer que les matériaux qu'on utilise pour faire cette transition-là sont aussi avec une empreinte carbone qui est plus faible.
Thank you. So maybe, Andrew, for you, the same question. I know some of yours is using existing technology, but still, what's your understanding?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, when we talk about infrastructure related to clean energy, there's a few important components. One, obviously, is new infrastructure. New infrastructure for creating and deploying clean energy. But I think that it's important to recognize that every piece of new infrastructure that is deployed and delivered does have a climate impact in itself in the creation of something new. So I think very strongly about the utilization, reuse, repurposing of existing infrastructure that we already have to be able to meet clean energy demands going forward, if not just in a transitionary period as well as long term.
Thank you. How about you, Laurent?
Well, I think, clean energy means decarbonized energy. A big challenge, of course, will be the production of electricity because, decarbonation of the transport sector is key for decarbonization. If we take the example of France, if we want to meet the zero carbon target in 2050, we need to increase by 40% the amount of electricity produced in France. This has led to a consensus which did not exist in France in the balance between renewable energies on one side and nuclear on the other side. And now we have reached this consensus saying, let's do not put in competition, renewables and nuclear, but let's increase in the very short term the nuclear capacities with 6 new nuclear plants, and also let's speed up very much the renewables infrastructure in order to meet this target. So I think clean energy means also limit the competition between the different types of infrastructure and make them complementary in order to reach the target.
Thank you. So I guess that brings back a little bit to your point, Andrew, about repurposing what we have. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on how you're doing that and sort of what the process has been for you?
Sure. So I can speak specifically to Aurora as an example, but there are other companies in the space pursuing a similar aim. For us, producing hydrogen, we think that it is critical that hydrogen's delivered at a low cost. And specifically, when we're talking about hydrogen, the primary complexity is the transportation of hydrogen. Moving it from point A to point B, it's an extremely light gas, and even if you produce it at a low cost centrally, it can still cost 2, 3, 4 times the expense associated with production just to move it to the point of use. So what we're advancing is a technology that leverages existing electricity and natural gas infrastructure to move the energy to the point of hydrogen demand, and then producing hydrogen where it's needed and eliminating the need for transportation. So in that way, we are making use of existing infrastructure without having to build new hydrogen pipelines or supply chains to deliver clean energy at the point of demand in a cost-effective way. And we think it's technologies like this that, and I'm sure there are examples in the electricity space and other energy mediums where the leveraging of existing infrastructure can not only bring that energy more quickly, aid the transition, because I believe that decarbonization now is certainly preferable to decarbonization later, but also do so in a very cost-effective way.
Thank you. Which is actually really comforting to know that maybe not everything is a long-term game and a long-term wait.
Well, we certainly think that there are long-term solutions. There are lots of long-term solutions that where we're aiming for, let's just say, perfection or an ideal case 20, 30 years from now. But we also understand the desperate need to make change as quickly as we possibly can.
Great, great. So maybe David, just that because you're dealing with metals, and what we're understanding now from discussions is also that to actually get to clean energy solution related infrastructure, we have to use a lot of the metals that exist now, and probably use a little more of that to develop this infrastructure. So that transition seems almost a bit chicken and egg. So what's that been like for you? On the mining side, has there been some developments that you could speak to that might say that we're in that direction of moving towards developing some technologies that will help us for clean energy?
Yeah, maybe if we take a little step back on this, what's interesting is that there's a bit of a lack of knowledge in terms of what's required to be able to decarbonize. And I think it's important to be able to get the data out so people can actually feel responsible. If you look at Quebec's sort of CO2 emissions in a broad view, it was stated recently that Quebec produces around 80 million tons of CO2 emissions per year. But I think what's interesting is to also look at what is imported into Quebec. And if you just look, or even into Canada, if you just look at steel, the steel imported in Canada and associated CO2 emissions, we're talking of roughly about 22 million tons of steel imported into Canada. And that's roughly about 40 million tons of CO2 emissions per year that's imported into Canada. And I think it's important to note that because that's roughly about 8% of the whole CO2 emissions in Canada. So we need to understand all these different elements. And the reason why I'm saying this is that we actually need support from population, from governments, from local communities to be able to develop mining projects. Because as you correctly stated, if we want to decarbonize the world, we're going to need a whole lot more metals than what we're currently mined today. And one of the biggest challenges, if you put technology aside, is to actually get these projects up and running. If you look in Canada today, I wouldn't be too off the chart by saying that to get a project from exploration to actual delivery, you're looking at roughly about 12 years. And if you look at the amount of metals that are required to be able to decarbonize, that time frame simply doesn't work. And that's because each project is looked at individually. Now, we can improve all of our mining projects by having technology to be able to reduce CO2 emissions, get products in a more elegant way. Maybe one example that I could give is, because your question was more to technologies to be able to do this, if you look at our mining site today at Bloom Lake, we produce a high-grade iron ore that's able to decarbonize the world. And we've partnered with a company called Caterpillar, and we're developing, using artificial intelligence, a drill that'll actually learn what type of material it's drilling in, and will be able to adapt the drilling pattern real time and change the amount of explosives that are used to be able to blast the material. Now, this will improve productivity, reduce CO2 emissions, and it's technologies that will help being able to do that and hopefully help us get better acceptability to get projects up and running. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really a great point that you made about also needing other forms of support to make things happen. And that's a great transition to you, Ion, because I know that you've worked on multiple projects in Romania, making it an energy hub, but also talking about the Black Sea from bringing energy from the Black Sea to the national grid. And in that respect, I guess you worked with the government, with regulatory bodies, and so on. So can you maybe speak a little bit about what that experience was like for you to get these projects up and running, and how was the impact on these projects?
Haideți să încep cu ce înseamnă reducerea emisiilor de dioxid de carbon. O gospodărie, o locuință pe fosil, într-un an de zile, emană circa 4 tone de CO2. Prin înlocuirea fosilului, cărbunelui, combustibilului lichid, cu gazul metan, reducerea e cu cel puțin 50-55%, până la 2 tone per an pe locuință, pe gospodărie. E nevoie de tranziție, pentru că tot ce au vorbit și colegii mei, antevorbitorii mei aici, vorbim pe hidrogen de proiecte pilot. Nu s-a ajuns la o piață a hidrogenului ca producție și valorizare la nivel regional, la nivel global. Nu, tehnologia n-a ajuns la acel nivel destul de ridicat să treacă la producția în serie de echipamente corespunzătoare. Vorbim de energie regenerabilă. Nu s-a ajuns la rezultatele cercetării la modul de stocare a energiei electrică. Știm că se stochează în baterii, dar e nevoie de litiu. Litiu nu se află în zonele țărilor democratice. Se află în China, se află în Rusia și așa mai departe. Trebuiesc infrastructuri noi, cum se pune problema pentru transportul hidrogenului. Dar de ce să nu folosim infrastructurile existente de gaze cu injecție controlată de hidrogen și cu investiții corespunzătoare până se va ajunge la a transporta 100% hidrogen și costurile pentru populație, pentru guverne, vor fi mult mai mici de suportat. Va fi un preț al gigacaloriei mult mai redus decât dacă ar veni să ar construi infrastructuri noi. Ne confruntăm la ora actuală, cel puțin statele din estul Europei, după flancul estic, hai să spunem că e stare de război și război ce e acolo în zonă, ce se întâmplă în Ucraina cu Rusia și așa mai departe, de la Marea Baltică la Marea Neagră și la Marea Mediterană, băncile, instituțiile financiare internaționale nu mai finanțează aceste infrastructuri de transport sau le finanțează cu condiții foarte dure. M-a bucurat ieri, în prima zi a conferinței, când bancherii care au reprezentat în paneluri aici sistemul bancar din Canada sunt dispuși la finanțări. Eu vă spun că aceste finanțări pentru construcția acestor infrastructuri vor fi necesare încă pentru 20-25 de ani și de atunci putem vorbi peste 20-25 de ani că suntem la etapa finală a tranziției. Nu se poate schimbare după o zi pe alta, că nu suntem pregătiți. Nici marile companii, nici cercetarea n-a ajuns la acest nivel. Și tot ne învârtim într-un pahar cu apă și nu ajungem la niciun punct. Un moment. În România, când ajung la București, vineri, în prezența primului ministru, voi semna ordinul de începere a lucrărilor pentru gazoductul care preia gazele din Marea Neagră către capitala țării București și mai departe prin infrastructura creată către Ungaria, Slovacia, Cehia, până în centrul Europei, în Austria.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe, Laurent, I can just extend the same question to you because you work with several companies and you've probably seen them address the same issues around regulatory requirements, around getting support from various authorities, getting financing, as Ian was referring to. What has been your experience, or what is sort of the feedback that you're getting from industry?
Well, first of all, I think we need to scale up. We need to scale up in many directions. The first direction is also the existing infrastructure. Don't forget that 50% of the greenhouse emissions right now come from current buildings and current infrastructure. So the first, scale, economy of scale, is to tackle these stock of buildings and infrastructure and make them, more closer, to clean energy. So this is a first market which everybody is targeting, and this is a big challenge. The second economy of scale, of course, is the future infrastructure. So nuclear programs, renewable infrastructure programs. The International Energy Agency assessed that we will need $4.5 trillion of investment in new green technology and infrastructure by 2030 if we want to meet the net zero carbon. This, of course, represents a huge market for our companies. I guess apart from the financing, there is also an issue on human resources. And talking about engineering, we know that we lack a lot of engineers. If we take the example of France, we lack 20,000 engineers a year to meet the needs of the market, to conceive, and of course then to build, the green infrastructure. Then you were talking about, the regulations. They will be absolutely necessary. If I take the example of number of polluting cars in the cities, if you don't introduce regulations, you won't have the impact that you're hoping on the decrease of the number of polluting cars in cities. The cities were, that 80% of the gas emissions, by the way, are linked, to the cities, and a lot of them are linked to the number of polluting cars in cities. So we need to introduce regulations on low emission zones, for instance, smart parking to make sure that there is a shift, of course, in the type of cars into the cities, but also that the number of polluting cars in the cities are decreasing. And I guess, these regulations are difficult, to put in place socially. There are a lot of opposition against these regulations. This is cross-party, by the way. But Egis, for instance, we manage the great emission zone, the low emission zone of the Greater Manchester, and this hopefully will lead to a decrease by 40% of the number of polluting cars in the very short term in the city of Manchester. So this is one example of regulation that I think will be more and more necessary in the future if we want to reach our targets.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely right. It's not just about like the G7 and G20 countries. It really needs to be across the board, and we need to have positive regulatory policies.
Also because, if I can add something, we are in the middle of a paradox. 2022 was the year record high in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So the trend is not going into the right direction. And if we look into the future, we need to welcome 2 billion more inhabitants on the planet. Of course, we will need more buildings, more infrastructure for them, to live in cities and of course, to be mobile between the different cities and countries. This will lead to more greenhouse gas emissions. So how do you reconcile, this paradox of a trend of increasing greenhouse emissions and commitments taken by everybody, the states, the local authorities, and the companies to reduce the greenhouse emissions? Well, we need to rely on our engineers, because only the engineers will be able to design, and also the contractors, companies, will be able to construct new infrastructure that will be less damaging for the environment.
I have one point to add to that, if that's okay, and that's underscoring completely. I agree with all of that. And I think that one of the ways through this, the engineering route, speaking as the technology developer on the panel, is through the advancement of new clean technologies, especially ones that, because I agree completely with your point. It doesn't matter how much renewable electricity we install if we're still emitting with the traditional historic sources. So finding one way is a regulatory path to stop people from doing things and hit them with a very big stick as much as you can. But another way is trying to advance technologies that can make energy cleaner and less expensive to the extent that we're able to do that.
And by the way, we had a very interesting example. In France, in the last winter, we thought we wouldn't have enough electricity. There would be shortages. So the government, asked everybody, without regulations, just out of awareness, to reduce the heating in the buildings to 19 degrees, which everybody did. And as a consequence, the consumption of energy decreased by 9%. So awareness of the population is also a very cheap way in order to achieve very short-term goals.
Yeah, it's just difficult that we were reminded of that in very strenuous situations. But I just want to circle back again to the point of talent, because we're living in this world of war for talent. So maybe, Andrew, for you quickly, to find people who have the right skills to do this technological developments that you need, do you see that, are we equipped as globally to bring talent? What do we need to do to foster future talent?
I think for us, they're generally speaking, I mean, we're doing some aspects of our business and our technology requires some extremely narrow discipline, and some of that needs to be just developed because we're doing new things. But I think very broadly, when it comes to attracting people to the space, it's largely about telling a compelling story. You know, we don't have a lot of trouble with recruitment. You know, I think people are very bought into the idea, especially, you know, young people, young engineers are extremely bought into the idea of decarbonization, of energy transition. And if there's an opportunity to go and work for a traditional energy company versus a company really pushing hard in the energy transition, people get really excited about that. So I think we've been very, very fortunate.
Perfect.
Maybe if I can add to that, I think if we go back to the importance of understanding data, I think what's interesting is that when people see that there's an issue, well, then it attracts talent because people want to solve the issue. If we're not lifting all of these issues to the same sort of level, well, then it makes it more difficult. If I look at a project like ours, we're currently working on a new plant to transform the iron ore to make the purest iron ore on Earth. That will allow our clients to decarbonize by 5 million tons of CO2 emissions per year. I mean, Quebec emits 80 million tons per year. So that's a massive project for just one small company like ours. But it's very difficult because if you look, high purity iron ore, it's not on the list of critical minerals. It's not on the list of strategic minerals. It's not something that people understand that it's really something that requires attention. So it's more difficult to attract talent. And now we can work in different ways in creating a fun environment and making sure that we can attract people. But I think it helps to also identify all of the issues that we have and then make sure that this draws the talent to be able to attack those issues.
Absolutely. We're coming close to the top of the hour, but I think there's one other issue that maybe we should quickly touch upon, and that is to scale. I think we briefly discussed it. Laurent brought up the topic of scale. Ian, for you, in the projects that you have initiated in Romania, you made it an energy hub. You thought about energy security. How do you think, how quickly can you build these projects to scale, and what would you need? Were there any hurdles to it? Or what did you do well in order to actually achieve scale to get here?
Deci, ce pot să vă spun? România, la ora actuală, prin poziția geostrategică în care se află, România fiind a doua țară din țările Uniunii Europene la producția de gaze și țiței, politicile guvernelor din ultimii 15-20 de ani s-au axat pe dezvoltarea infrastructurilor de transport și în special pe interconectivitate cu țările vecine. Vedeți noastră, s-a întâmplat și se întâmplă ce în Ucraina și cu Rusia. S-a întâmplat ce s-a întâmplat cu Nord Stream 2 și dintr-o dată au sărit prețurile atât la gaze cât și la energie, cu efecte negative asupra nivelului de trai al populației la nivel global. Noi în România am reușit necesarul de gaze să ne luăm din surse diversificate prin interconectările care le avem, inclusiv să pot transporta gaze la ora actuală pe gazoducte din Azerbaidjan, din terminalele de gaze din Turcia de LNG din terminalele de LNG din Grecia, care sunt în continuare în dezvoltare. Suntem acum la finalul definirii strategiei de decarbonizare a sistemului național de transport. Suntem în partea avansată de a adapta conductele de transport gaze, care astăzi permit injecția de până la 20% hidrogen fără investiții, și lucrăm într-un ritm alert până a ajunge la a transporta hidrogen 100%. Folosim potențialul eolien al țării, folosim și are o pondere foarte mare mixtul energetic al țării, ca și la dumneavoastră în Canada, energia hidro. Suntem în a folosi potențialul eolian, wind din Black Sea. Suntem a folosi energia solară. Sunt fonduri la ora actuală de la Comisia Europeană. Deci, e un început care îl văd în Europa, e un început care îl văd în statele democratice și dezvoltate după glob, dar ceea ce însemnăm noi, semnăm o parte, o pondere mică din populația globului. Încă o dată, repet, ce facem cu Rusia, ce facem cu China, ce facem cu Asia, ce facem cu Indonezia, ce facem cu statele din America Sud, că degeaba vorbim noi aici să reducem poluare și să combatem schimbările climaterice. Mergeți la Beijing, să vedeți cum e acolo, aproape tot timpul anului e poluare totală. Suntem în deficit la nivel global de specialiști pe noile provocări în care suntem, așa cum colegul a menționat foarte bine, de ingineri. Necesarul e foarte mare, dar trebuie să fim optimiști și să depunem toate eforturile pentru viitor.
Thank you. I think, Laurent, maybe you wanted to comment on the...
Yeah, on the issue of scale. Scale is important also to decrease costs. First of all, you know, in France, as I said, we need to multiply by 4 the offshore wind capacity of the country, and to multiply by 7 the solar production capacity if we want to meet the net zero target of 2050. But this is also important to lower the cost of the next infrastructure to make sure that they are sustainable also on a financial basis. So scale is important also in terms of attractiveness to the engineers. You know, if the engineers, they see that they are on the long-term program, like, you know, we've been in France in the 70s with building a lot of nuclear plants to make France independent for its energy production. This, of course, is very attractive to the young engineers. So scale is important financially. Scale is important in terms of attractiveness for talent, attractiveness and retention.
Thank you. Maybe David, quickly, just on the matter of scale and supply chain. How does that work for you, particularly sort of in the mining industry? It must go hand in hand, right?
Yeah, what's interesting is that there's certain areas where it's easier to mine certain minerals and then be able to deliver them to the different clients. If you look at one of Canada's biggest strengths, and that is not really known, is that we have one of the largest high-grade iron ore bodies in the world, undeveloped. So we have the possibility to do at least times 10 on our iron ore industry. When you look at the advantages in terms of scale, well, that reduces the cost significantly when you look at infrastructure build to be able to bring this material to our clients and to be able to also develop the region. When you have scale, it's also easier to invest in different technologies, because if you want to look at autonomous mining, if you want to look at various improvements that we could do, well, they're very difficult when you look at small companies that operate each their own mines, much easier when you have scale. So I think it's important to be able to work on this, but I think it goes again to the point of acceptability. So you need to make sure that you have the right First Nations group that will be able to work with you to be able to develop the projects. You need the support of the local communities, because when you talk about scale, you also talk about larger impacts, and then you have more criticism. So scale is good to be able to deliver projects, but it's also a challenge in terms of getting the projects up and running and getting them approved.
And Andrew, for you, I recollect you're going to have a demonstration facility just outside of Edmonton, 200 kgs per day yield. So what has sort of been the response to you in terms of, as what David was mentioning, what the community thinks? Is that seen positively? Has that been easy to do?
I think where we're seeing the best response is in the counterpoint to the scale that we're discussing, because obviously large scale drives down costs. That's the significant benefit of scale. And the drawback or the challenge is that scale takes time. You know, it takes time to develop projects, it takes time for permitting, it takes time for multi-party coordination. So again, to the extent that we're in a race to decarbonize, and it's better to do the things now that we can do now, we do think that a wide spectrum of scale is really what makes the most sense. You know, we develop the large scale projects to drive costs down, and then for applications where we can move quickly, where there's an incentive to move quickly at a smaller scale and decarbonize in a local way, in a small scale way, we think that should be advanced as well. And I think that, you know, one of the things Aurora is doing is looking for those opportunities to advance decarbonization at a modest scale at first, and then work towards scale in the future.
Great. We're almost there, and I want to end on an optimistic note. I mean, I think we're doing great stuff, or you're doing great stuff. But yesterday, in one of the other panels around energy transition or green energy, I think the panelists were asked to sort of rate their optimism levels on a scale of 1 to 10. So I want to bring that also in the context of infrastructure. For each of you, if you have to say, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being obviously the most optimistic, how optimistic are you about being infrastructure ready for clean energy-driven solutions by 2050? Because we know infrastructure is a long-term game. So what does that look like for you? Ian, what would be your score?
E un optimism moderat și am menționat mai înainte mai multe cauze. Suntem la început de drum. Cu Green Deal-ul, cu tranziția, nu se poate trece de la modul de producție a energiei care este acum, direct la partea de a produce energie cu emisii zero. E necesară o perioadă de tranziție unde gazul metan e cel care va face tranziția. Cel puțin din punctul ăsta de vedere, reducând emisiile de dioxid de carbon până la 50%. Iar altă sursă, și sunt de acord cu colegul din Franța, susțin energia nucleară în continuare, că nu prezintă niciun risc de poluare și e ținută în parametri corespunzători. E necesară și energia nucleară în continuare.
Thank you. David, what about you? How optimistic are you?
Yeah, for 2050, I'm pretty optimistic. 2030, I think it's going to be a pretty big disaster because I do believe, and I think to your comment when you mentioned that there was a panic mode in France in terms of energy, and people were able to reduce by 9% their consumption without investing pretty much a single dollar. So when people are in panic mode, we see it in everything in human life. When you get a heart attack, then you start eating healthy. You need to get to that point, and now we're starting to get to that point, but I don't think people feel really involved emotionally on their own to make hard decisions in terms of that transition. I think we're starting to get the know-how, and now we're sort of in pilot mode in a lot of different things. But I do think that the major transition is going to happen beyond 2030. Now we're making a few electric cars, we're making a few elements, and I think it's in the right direction. But I don't see the massive investment that is required for clean energy happening. I don't see it in mining. I don't see it in any other space to seriously decarbonize the world.
Andrew?
Well, as a hardware technology CEO, my optimism dial is permanently stuck at 11. Perhaps by necessity. But I think honestly, I'm very optimistic. I think based on the world that I live in technology startup, we see a lot of what's out there. We see a lot of things at the bleeding edge. We see a lot of things that are being developed. Not all of it's going to make it, but I think there's a critical mass of technology that's being advanced with a lot of money behind it and a lot of super smart people that, by 2030, 2035, we're going to see a lot of really exciting things deployed and operating and actively decarbonizing the economy.
Thank you. Laurent?
I'm quite optimistic. I would say maybe 8. I think for a couple of reasons. First reason is, the recent decision of the United States, which are a key player in terms of decarbonization. And I think that the IRA is a strong signal on, how the US is now committed to reaching its goals. And I think the other governments are also inspired by the IRA, or they want to counterattack after the IRA, which means a lot of public money will now be channeled into attracting more investments into green infrastructure. The second reason I'm quite optimistic is that the private companies have understood all the benefits they could get out of an ESG policy, and also being involved into the transition into a greener economy. First of all, the banks are now not financing anymore, I would say, the non-green projects. Second, valuation of the companies involved in contributing to the fight against climate change are significantly already higher than the valuation of the other companies. And in terms of attractiveness, especially in terms of being attractive to Generation Z, the companies fully committed to the fight against climate change are recruiting more talents than the other ones. That's why I'm quite optimistic.
Great, thank you. We're almost on precision on time. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us today. Sorry, we just ran out of time. We ran out of time.
Sunt prezent aici la această conferință de mare prestigiu pentru a întâlni și a stabili contacte cu companii pentru coborare pe hidrogen, care este foarte necesară pentru România și pentru celelalte țări din estul Europei. Și în al doilea rând, ne-am întâlnit cu reprezentanții ai sistemului bancar din Canada, care am văzut ieri că sunt flexibili la finanțări pe infrastructurile de care am amintit în intervențiile mele anterioare. Vă mulțumesc.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.